He was just smiling at the crowd, and in the next second there was blood all over the stage.
He was just smiling at the crowd, and in the next second, there was blood all over the stage. It was supposed to be another sold-out night in Las Vegas. Bright lights, roaring applause, and the legendary Siegfried and Roy taking the stage at the Mirage, just like they had done thousands of times before. Families had traveled from all over the country, children clutching tiger plushies, adults buzzing with excitement to see the iconic duo perform live with their famous white tigers. But on October 3rd, 2003, something happened that no one, not the audience, not the crew, not even Roy Horn himself could have ever imagined. Right in the middle of the act, as Roy gestured for the tiger to move into position, Montecore, a 400-pound white Bengal tiger, suddenly turned locked eyes with him and lunged. In a split second, the audience went silent. At first, many thought it was part of the show, just another dramatic trick. But then they saw it. Montecore had his jaws wrapped around Roy's neck. Blood poured onto the stage floor as the tiger clamped down and violently dragged Roy backward off his feet toward the curtains. There were screams, shrill, panicked. One child reportedly started crying uncontrollably. A woman in the front row fainted. Some guests stood up in disbelief, unsure whether to run or keep watching. The orchestra fell silent. The music stopped. Backstage handlers rushed out with fire extinguishers and CO2 canisters. They sprayed the tiger desperately, trying to force him to release Roy. The scene was chaos, a beautiful illusion, shattered in seconds, replaced by the horrifying sound of Roy gurgling for air and Montecore growling over him. The man who had made a career out of controlling the wild was suddenly at its mercy. If stories like this grip you, stories where nature blurs the line between awe and terror, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Welcome to Animal's story, where real animal encounters unfold, with all the drama, emotion, and raw truth behind the headlines. We dig deep into the events, the people, the animals, and the hidden systems behind it all. Don't just hear the story, understand it. Now, back to the moment that changed Las Vegas forever. As Roy lay bleeding, unable to speak, he tried to gesture with his hand, a weak attempt to signal he was still conscious. One crew member would later recall how Roy's eyes weren't filled with fear, but confusion, as if he couldn't understand how his tiger could do this. Paramedics were called immediately. The tiger had crushed Roy's windpipe and severed arteries in his neck. The show was shut down. The theater evacuated. Roy was rushed to University Medical Center in critical condition, flatlining twice on the way there. He survived, but barely. News of the attack swept across America like wildfire. Every late-night show, every talk show, every morning, headline Tiger attacks Roy Horn on stage. What went wrong? Why did Montecore snap, and why that night? Was it an accident or a failure years in the making? The answers weren't simple, and they started with understanding not just the attack, but the people and animals involved, the silent warning signs everyone ignored, and the invisible line between performance and primal instinct. The illusion was broken, and it would never be the same again. Before the blood, before the screams, before the headlines, there were two men in matching suits and dazzling smiles who made Las Vegas feel like magic. Siegfried Fischbacher and Roy Horn weren't just performers, they were living legends. Their act wasn't just about illusion, it was about wonder. They didn't pull rabbits out of hats. They brought full-grown tigers onto the stage and made them vanish into thin air. In a city built on the impossible, Siegfried and Roy made people believe in miracles. But while Siegfried was the showman, the one with the flourish and the charm, Roy was the soul behind the animals. Born in Germany, Roy grew up fascinated by creatures most kids only saw in books. He wasn't scared of them. He didn't just want to pet them. He wanted to understand them. As a teenager, he reportedly snuck a cheetah onto a cruise ship where he worked just because he wanted to spend more time with it. That's the kind of man he was. By the time they hit the Vegas stage in the late 70s, Roy had developed a reputation. The man who could whisper to wild beasts. But it wasn't magic. It was obsession, trust, and thousands of hours of one-on-one bonding with some of the most dangerous animals on Earth. He didn't just train them, he raised them, fed them, bathed them, slept beside them. He said they were his family. Montecore, the tiger who would later maul him, had been with Roy since he was a 6-month-old cub. Photos showed Roy cradling him like a baby. Videos captured moments where Montecore licked Roy's face like a house cat. To the world, it looked like love. To Roy, it was love. But behind the curtain, not everyone was convinced. Handlers voiced concern. Some animal behaviorists warned that the tigers weren't being read properly. They weren't trained. They said they were tolerating the act. One wrong movement, one loud noise, one moment of confusion, and the illusion would come crashing down. Roy, however, was confident. Too confident, some say. He believed in a kind of spiritual connection with his tigers, a bond beyond instinct. In interviews, he often said, "They are not animals, they are my brothers." That mindset made Roy unique, but it also made him vulnerable. When you believe you're the exception to nature's rules, you stop seeing the danger. And when danger comes wrapped in white fur and blue eyes, it's easy to forget what it's capable of. Their shows became staples of the Strip. Tourists flew in from across the country just to see Roy walk a 400-pound predator across the stage like a loyal pet. People clapped, children pointed, celebrities whispered backstage that they couldn't believe how close Roy could get to those animals. But over time, cracks began to show. Roy's connection to the animals became almost personal spiritual. He refused to use certain tools or cues that trainers considered standard. He would get too close. Sometimes he'd improvise not just with props, but with real living creatures who had the power to kill him in an instant. Still, no one stopped him. Why would they? The act was a money-printing machine. The Mirage show brought in over $44 million per year at its peak. The city built Siegfried and Roy a special theater. They were part of the Vegas identity. Until that one night in October, when the tiger didn't play by the rules anymore. And suddenly, everyone who had once called Roy fearless started wondering, had he simply been too close for too long? To most people, Montecore was a majestic white Bengal tiger, sleek, rare, and beautiful. On stage, under those shimmering Las Vegas lights, he didn't look like a predator. He looked like a performer, a star. But under the spotlight behind the makeup of glamour and illusion, Montecore was still a tiger, a wild animal born with instincts no amount of training could erase. He wasn't just a prop in the act. He was central to it. From the age of 6 months, Montecore had been raised by Roy Horn like a child. Roy fed him from a bottle, let him sleep near him, and introduced him to stage life early. Bright lights, loud crowds, and constant commands. It wasn't natural, but it became routine. He was praised as gentle, well-behaved, even loving. But trainers and animal behaviorists know there's no such thing as a truly tame tiger. Not really. Montecore, for all his apparent calmness, had a history. Sources later revealed he had once swatted at a stagehand, and another time he showed signs of resistance to commands, moments dismissed as minor mood swings. After all, he was family. But here's the thing, wild animals don't just snap, they signal first. In the days before the incident, some handlers noticed that Montecore was behaving unusually. He was less responsive to cues, seemed agitated, and paced more than usual backstage. Roy, however, dismissed the warnings. He believed Montecore was just having an off day. He always said, "If I'm calm, he'll be calm." But that wasn't a training method, that was a gamble. Experts watching the incident later pointed out something chilling. When Montecore grabbed Roy by the neck, he didn't thrash him or claw him like a typical predator. Instead, he dragged him off stage fast but deliberate. That suggested a different behavior than pure aggression. Some argued Montecore was trying to protect Roy. According to Roy himself, he had suffered a mini-stroke during the act, and Montecore sensed something was wrong. "He was trying to save me," Roy said later. But others weren't so sure. Animal behaviorists pointed out that grabbing someone by the neck is how a tiger handles prey, whether it's a kill a cub or something in between. Tigers are incredibly strong and instinct-driven. When something unexpected happens, a sudden movement, a drop in energy confusion in a routine, they don't think, they react. Montecore may not have attacked out of rage, but he also wasn't acting out of affection. He was acting on instinct. The problem wasn't Montecore. The problem was how human we expected him to be. In the world of exotic animal performance, there's a dangerous myth that with enough love, repetition, and exposure, a wild animal becomes domestic. That you can turn a 400-pound tiger into a lapdog if you raise it right. Montecore's story shatters that myth. He wasn't evil. He wasn't broken. He didn't hate Roy. He was simply a tiger doing what tigers do when the world around them becomes unpredictable. And the truth is, no matter how many years of trust exist, a wild animal doesn't sign a contract to behave. There's no safety net. No guarantee. You're trusting that instinct will always stay quiet, that it'll sleep, purr, obey. But on that night, Montecore reminded everyone watching that Wild is never truly gone. What happened on that stage in 2003 wasn't just a freak accident. It was a warning that had been ignored for years, not just by individuals, but by an entire system built on spectacle and silence. Siegfried and Roy were more than just magicians. In Las Vegas, they were a brand. Their faces were plastered on billboards up and down the strip. Tour buses carried fans daily to their custom-built theater inside the Mirage, a theater designed specifically to accommodate live animals. It was one of the most expensive shows in Vegas history, grossing over $44 million annually at its peak. Roy and Siegfried were household names, and so were their white tigers. They weren't just performers, they were the golden geese for the hotel, the casino, the entire entertainment ecosystem. And when something makes that much money, people stop asking questions. Behind the curtains, there were whispers. Staff had seen near misses. Handlers raised concerns that some animals were showing signs of stress. Montecore himself had reportedly acted out before nothing as serious as what happened that night, but enough to scare a few crew members. There were safety protocols, sure, but they weren't always followed. And more importantly, there was no real oversight. No regulatory body reviewed how the animals were trained, how they were handled backstage, or what kind of stress they were under night after night. It's not just about one tiger. It's about a culture where danger was romanticized, even monetized. Roy loved his animals, no doubt, but love doesn't equal safety. And no amount of emotional connection can override the fact that wild animals don't belong on a stage under bright lights surrounded by thousands of people cheering and clapping. Even when staff flagged Montecore's behavior before that infamous show, there was no system in place to stop the performance. Roy had final say, and Roy believed the tiger would never hurt him. The show had to go on. That kind of unchecked control, that blind faith, created the perfect storm. And the Mirage. They had every reason to look the other way. The longer the show stayed open, the more money poured in. The hotel became a landmark because of Siegfried and Roy. Tourists came for the magic and the promise that they were watching something rare, something dangerous but controlled. Except the danger was never actually controlled. It was just well-dressed. Some insiders later revealed that there was pressure not to speak out. Handlers were expected to trust Roy's instincts. Concerns weren't documented. It was an environment built on silence, not science. This wasn't just an accident. This was a systemic failure, one that started long before that October night. It started the moment we decided that wild animals could be trained into props. The moment applause became more important than accountability. The moment no one dared to challenge the myth because the myth was profitable. After the attack, there were investigations, but no charges. No one was officially blamed. Montecore was spared, Roy defended him, and the Mirage quietly let the show go dark. The headlines faded, the tourists moved on. But for those who looked closer, the real question wasn't, why did the tiger attack? It was, why did we ever think this was safe to begin with? October 3rd, 2003 started like any other show night. Backstage, the crew moved through their routines. Costumes were laid out, props were checked, animals were prepped. On the surface, everything looked fine, normal even. But if you looked closely, something was off. Montecore wasn't himself. Handlers later said he'd been restless all day, pacing, not responding to cues the way he usually did. One staffer mentioned that the tiger had fixated on Roy during rehearsal, tilting his head like he was confused or trying to figure something out. It wasn't aggression, but it also wasn't calm. Still, no red flags were raised, not officially. This was Siegfried and Roy, after all. The idea of canceling a show because one of the tigers was a little off just wasn't on the table. The room moved with practiced speed like a train on well-worn tracks. Roy had always said, the animals trust me, I can feel it. But trust isn't a leash. It doesn't stop instinct when the lights hit and the crowd roars. As showtime approached, Montecore was led into position. Roy gave him a familiar command, one they'd done hundreds of times. The tiger hesitated. That alone should have been enough to pause the act, even for just a moment. But Roy pressed forward, waving his arm, guiding Montecore into the spotlight. Then something went wrong. Eyewitnesses say that Roy stumbled slightly, just a step, just a pause. But it was enough. Montecore reacted instantly, lunging forward and placing a massive paw on Roy's chest. Roy raised his microphone trying to back away and said words that still echo in the minds of those who were there. No, 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 Montecore. The tiger clamped down on Roy's neck and yanked him backward. Gasps filled the theater. Some people thought it was part of the act, a dramatic twist in the show. But when blood began to pool, and when Montecore dragged Roy like a rag doll off his feet, the illusion shattered. Screams broke out. Security scrambled. The orchestra stopped playing mid-note. Backstage chaos unfolded as handlers rushed in with CO2 canisters, trying to startle the tiger into letting go. It took seconds, just seconds. But in those few moments, Roy suffered a crushed windpipe, a severed artery, and what would later be diagnosed as a stroke, likely brought on by blood loss and trauma. He was dying before anyone could even process what had just happened. As Roy was pulled from Montecore's jaws and rushed into an ambulance, Siegfried, his lifelong partner, was left standing on stage stunned. The act they had built for decades, the dream that had made them legends, was over in an instant. Later doctors would confirm that Roy flatlined twice on the way to the hospital. He survived but never returned to the stage. The man who once danced with tigers couldn't walk without help or speak in full sentences. In hindsight, there were so many chances to stop the train moments where someone could have said, "Not tonight." But in a world driven by money, by belief, by myth, no one did. And maybe the most haunting part of it all, this wasn't a freak moment of rage or betrayal. This was the natural result of 1,000 tiny decisions, each one made, with confidence, with trust, with faith in a system that couldn't hold. And when Roy stepped onto that stage for the last time, he believed, truly believed, that love and experience were enough. But nature doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care how long you've trained or how deeply you believe in the bond. It only cares about the moment. And in that moment, the tiger took control. When the curtain closed that night in Las Vegas, it never opened again. Not for Siegfried and Roy, not for Montecore, and not for the world they had built. Roy Horn survived, but just barely. He spent weeks in critical condition, underwent 2 major surgeries, and suffered permanent injuries. His speech was slurred. He lost mobility. The man who once stood center stage commanding wild animals now needed help walking across a room. The Mirage immediately shut down the show, canceling what had once been one of the city's biggest attractions. Just like that, an era ended not with a grand finale, but with a moment of silence and a hospital bed. And Montecore. He wasn't euthanized. That decision surprised many. But Roy insisted, even from his hospital room, that the tiger wasn't at fault. He claimed Montecore sensed something was wrong, possibly a stroke, and was trying to carry him to safety. It was a touching theory, one filled with loyalty and love, but animal behaviorists weren't so convinced. To them, the behavior looked like instinct, a tiger reacting to confusion, seizing control of a chaotic moment, the only way he knew how. The debate never really ended. Was it a rescue, an attack, a tragic misunderstanding? Montecore lived for another decade away from the public eye. He died in 2014 peacefully in captivity, but the story didn't fade. It lingered in conversations about animal ethics, performance, and where we draw the line between wonder and exploitation. For decades, Siegfried and Roy had been symbols of enchantment. They blurred the line between human and animal magic and reality. But in the end, their greatest illusion that wild animals could be tamed completely was shattered in front of thousands of witnesses. Their legacy became complicated. Yes, they inspired millions. Yes, they loved their animals. But did they go too far? In the years following the attack, public attitudes began to shift. Documentaries like Blackfish campaigns against circuses and conversations around animal captivity gained traction. People started asking harder questions. Should wild animals be used in live entertainment? Can we ever truly give them what they need in a theater or zoo? And if we can't, should we even try? Roy and Siegfried both passed away in 2020, just months apart. They left behind a story filled with triumph, tragedy, and an unanswered question that still echoes. Can we love something wild without caging it? And maybe that's the most important part of their legacy, not the lights, not the tricks, not even the fame, but the hard conversations their story forced us to have. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't just about one tiger or one performer. It was about our relationship with nature, with control, and with the limits of what we call entertainment. So here's the question I leave for you. Do you think it's ever truly ethical to keep wild animals for the sake of performance? Or is the cost, no matter how rare, simply too high? Let us know what you think in the comments. We want to hear your voice. And if you found this story thought-provoking, emotional, or eye-opening, don't forget to subscribe to Animal Story. We uncover the real stories behind the shows, the headlines, and the animals that change lives, sometimes forever. Because behind every roar, there's a truth worth telling.